Some songs are never finished, and some people, quiet strangers crossing paths, turn out to be exactly who we were waiting for all along. A humble mechanic, tucked away in a small town, a wealthy woman carrying a grief too deep to name, a broken music box, and a hidden photograph inside that changes everything. Where the light comes back is more than a story about music or fate. It's a quiet, powerful journey of two souls who've lost nearly everything, only to discover that healing doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in kindness, and in a melody that finally finds its way home. If you believe that good things have a way of returning, if you've ever held on to an unfinished feeling, a forgotten dream, or a love that never quite left, subscribe to the channel and join us. Each story here is a gentle reminder that even in life's quietest corners, something beautiful is always waiting. And now, let the story begin. Poor mechanic repairs music box for a billionaire woman. She opens it and cries, seeing a hidden photo. The rain had begun just after noon, light, steady, and polite in the way small-town rain tended to be. It fell over the quiet roofs of Willow Creek, Missouri, streaking down weather-worn windows and settling into the cracked asphalt like a familiar tune played too many times. At the edge of town, where the road curled lazily past fields of golden grass, there stood a squat square garage with peeling green trim and a crooked open sign that had lost its light years ago. Inside, the air smelled of oil, old coffee, and pine sawdust. A rusted fan turned slowly overhead, more out of habit than purpose. Noah Carter sat on a folding stool beside a half-dismantled pickup truck, his hands dark with grease and age. 53, maybe 54. It didn't matter to him anymore. His days were built of clinks and clatters, slow mornings, and the reliable hum of tools against metal. He didn't need much. A strong cup of coffee, a working radio, and something broken to fix. He had been patching a carburetor when he heard it. The low, unmistakable purr of an engine that did not belong here. Too smooth, too clean. A black SUV, glossy and foreign, against the muddy gravel, rolled to a stop just outside his open bay doors. He wiped his hands on an old rag, eyes narrowing as the door opened. She stepped out slowly. A tall woman, wrapped in a long grey trench coat that swayed with the breeze. Her boots were suede, expensive, impractical. Her hair was the kind of silver that didn't pretend to be young, tied neatly at her neck. Everything about her said she didn't belong here, and yet her eyes, the way they scanned the garage like it was a sanctuary, said maybe she did. "Are you Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice low and steady. Noah nodded, leaning against the truck. "That's me." She looked over her shoulder at the SUV. "Someone in town said you might be able to fix something for me. Not a car, something smaller, older." He raised an eyebrow. "Older than that '86 Buick I saw limping down Main Street yesterday." Her lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. She walked to the passenger side, opened the door, and carefully pulled out a wooden box wrapped in a scarf. She held it like it might break again if the wind blew too hard. A music box. She placed it gently on Noah's workbench. "It hasn't played in years," she said quietly. "It used to, every night. Then it stopped. I'd like it to play. Again." Noah studied her for a beat. He was good at reading people, not their words, but their silences. She wasn't just here for the box. She was here because she'd lost something. Maybe many things. He lifted the lid. Inside, the delicate mechanism was still intact, but worn. A figurine, mother and child, was frozen in mid-turn. The key at the bottom was missing a tooth. The box had once been beautiful. Rosewood inlaid, with faded gold. Time had tried its best to forget it. "It'll take a few days," he said. "I'll have to strip it down, see what's inside. Sometimes it's just dust. Other times, well, we'll see." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Noah glanced toward the SUV. "You're not from here?" "No." She hesitated. "I used to be, a long time ago." He didn't ask more. He just nodded and turned back to the bench, already reaching for his small screwdriver set. As she moved to leave, she paused at the door. "My name's Rebecca," she said, almost as an afterthought. "Noah," he replied. Their eyes met for a moment. There was something there, not recognition, not yet, but a flicker of something older than memory, a familiarity that didn't quite belong. Then she was gone, the SUV humming quietly down the wet road, leaving behind the scent of lavender and rain. Noah stood still for a long moment, the music box open in front of him. The figurines stared up at the ceiling, trapped in their silence. He reached for a cloth, gently brushing the dust from the metal teeth of the cylinder. There was something about this box, something in the way the melody, though absent, still seemed to linger in the air. He ran a calloused hand across the lid and noticed for the first time a faint inscription carved into the wood, almost invisible beneath time's patina. "For the nights we'll always remember." He frowned. That line, it tickled something at the edge of his memory, something warm, something unfinished. Outside, the rain continued to fall in steady rhythm, like a metronome keeping time with a melody not yet played. And inside, in the quiet hum of a life built around broken things, Noah Carter began to wonder if something, perhaps even someone, was calling him back to the music. Rebecca drove in silence, the windshield wipers keeping rhythm with the rain, each sweep slicing through the blur of her thoughts. The winding roads of Willow Creek stretched ahead, familiar in ways she hadn't expected. Trees she used to climb, a general store now boarded up, a church steeple that hadn't changed in 4 decades. Everything looked the same, and everything felt different. She hadn't meant to come back. Not really. Her house in the city sat empty, like a museum to the life she'd built, an empire of steel and glass and boardrooms. But after James died, none of it made sense anymore. The meetings, the headlines, the charity galas, where everyone smiled too much and said too little. What? Did any of it matter if her son, her only child, was gone? The only thing she had left of him was that music box. He'd loved it since he was little, a gift from some forgotten shop, picked up during a summer trip they took when he was 8. It played a melody that calmed him, a tune he'd hum when nervous or scared. Even as a teenager, taller than her and full of opinions, James would keep the box on his nightstand. And when the accident came, too fast, too sudden, too cruel, the music box became her anchor. Until it stopped playing. The silence was unbearable, so here she was, driving through rain toward a rented cottage on the edge of town, having handed the most precious object she owned to a stranger with grease on his shirt and sadness in his eyes. Noah Carter. The name echoed as she turned onto a gravel path. She hadn't said it out loud in decades, but something about it felt familiar, like a tune she'd once known by heart but could no longer hum. She parked and stepped out into the rain, not bothering with an umbrella. The wind smelled of earth and wet cedar. In the distance, the hills rolled like sleeping giants, quiet beneath the mist. Inside the cottage, she peeled off her coat, lit the fireplace, and sat on the threadbare couch. Everything was simple here. A kettle, a paperback left behind, a few chipped mugs. She'd chosen this place because it didn't expect anything from her. It didn't demand a version of her that smiled for cameras or gave interviews about resilience and power. Here she could grieve. Here she could remember. And tonight, as the fire crackled and rain whispered against the windows, she remembered. Something else, something small, almost buried. A summer fair. Willow Creek, maybe 1995. She'd driven down from college to visit her aunt and ended up at a charity concert in the park. She remembered the lights strung between trees, lemonade in paper cups, and a young man, barely more than a boy, playing piano beneath the stars. He hadn't played like someone trained in conservatories. He played like he felt each note, like the music was his way of breathing. She remembered watching him from the crowd, her heart catching in her throat because he looked so heartbreakingly lonely, and yet his music felt full of hope. She'd spoken to him after the show, just briefly, asked him what the piece was. "Something I wrote," he'd said, rubbing the back of his neck, sheepish. "It's not finished," she had smiled. "It doesn't need to be." They had only spoken for 10 minutes, maybe less. She never asked his name. And yet something about that night lingered. A memory left to settle in the corners of her mind like dust on old furniture. Could it be? No, it couldn't. Rebecca shook the thought away. It didn't matter who he was. What mattered was the music box and the song inside that refused to die. Back in his garage, Noah worked past midnight. The mechanism was intricate, worn in places, but salvageable. The cylinder's pins were bent, the comb's teeth misaligned. He handled it all with reverence, as though restoring a relic rather than a child's keepsake. What stayed with him, though, wasn't the mechanics. It was the woman, Rebecca. He couldn't place her exactly, but there was something about the way she looked at the box, like it wasn't just an object, but a doorway. A passage to someone she had loved fiercely and lost, and the music. He knew that melody. It was his, a piece he'd written long ago, back when he still believed music could save people. Back when his world hadn't yet collapsed under the weight of grief. He hadn't played in years, hadn't even touched the keys, not since his brother died. Noah glanced toward the corner of the garage where a dusty tarp covered an upright piano. He hadn't had the heart to sell it, just as she hadn't let go of that music box. 2 people, 2 broken melodies. He sat on the stool again, holding the tiny comb in his fingers. The faintest smile touched his lips. "Well, old girl," he murmured to the box, "let's see if we can get you singing again." The wind had died down overnight, and by morning the rain had thinned to a cold mist that curled around the eaves of the garage, like breath on a winter window. Noah Carter stood at his workbench beneath the hum of the old ceiling lamp, the music box open before him like a secret finally ready to be told. He worked in silence, fingers moving with the patience of someone used to coaxing life back into things others had given up on. The tiny brass cylinder sat in the center of a linen cloth, its pins bent at odd angles, dulled by age and time. The comb, with its delicate metal teeth, had a faint crack at the base. Nothing he couldn't reinforce. It wasn't the most complicated mechanism he'd ever repaired, not even close, but something about it made his hands slower, gentler, reverent even, because he knew this song. Noah didn't mean knew it, the way one recognizes a famous tune. He meant he knew it, note by note. The melody unfolded in his memory, not just the sound, but the shape of it, the way it rose slowly, hesitated, then fell like a sigh. The way it ended unresolved, hanging in the air like a question no one ever answered. He'd written this more than 30 years ago. The realization hit like a breeze through an open window, quiet, startling, and full of memory. Back then, he was just a boy with a battered piano and too many emotions to name. His brother was already sick, though no one had said it out loud. The hospital visits were starting. The looks on their parents' faces were changing. Noah, overwhelmed and helpless, had sat at the piano one night with tears he couldn't shed and turned it all into sound. He called it Summer Stillness. He never finished it, never showed it to anyone except his breath caught, except once, at a charity concert in Willow Creek Park, a community fundraiser. He was 17. It was the first time he ever played in front of strangers. There had been lemonade stands, old couples dancing in the grass, and strings of warm yellow lights swaying between trees. And her. He hadn't thought about her in years. A girl, no, a young woman, home from college, she'd said. They'd spoken after he played, 10 minutes at most. But he remembered the way she looked at him, not with pity, not with admiration, but with something gentler, like she heard him, like she understood. She had asked about the song. It's not finished, he'd told her. She had smiled. It doesn't need to be. Noah stood there now, staring at the music box, heart beating like the hammer of a piano key just before it strikes the string. Could it be? No. It was too unlikely. He'd played that melody one time at one small event for a few dozen people. 3 decades ago. How could it possibly have made its way into this box, into her hands? He reached for a delicate brush and swept away the last of the dust. The wooden frame gleamed faintly under the light. He tilted the box and ran his finger along the inside rim where old makers sometimes signed their work. No initials, no dates, but something else caught his eye. The carvings along the lid, barely visible beneath the faded lacquer, weren't factory-made. Someone had etched them by hand, tiny swirls, uneven and imperfect, like they'd been added in a hurry. And on the underside of the lid, just inside the velvet lining, a single carved word, James. Noah whispered it aloud, the name unfamiliar yet weighted with emotion. He sat back slowly, wiping his hands on a rag, then reached for the cloth that covered the upright piano in the corner. He hadn't touched the thing in years. It was slightly out of tune, but the bones were still strong, like him. He sat, cracked his knuckles, and placed his fingers on the keys, and then gently, hesitantly, he played. The notes came like whispers at first, wavering, unsure, then stronger. The melody rose just as he remembered it, sweet, slow, aching. The middle section climbed towards something hopeful, but it never quite arrived. The final phrase lingered, then drifted down like dusk settling on an empty field. Noah sat in silence when it was over. His hands rested on the keys, still. His eyes burned. He remembered now, he remembered writing it for his brother, yes, but also, in some inexplicable way, for her. The girl in the park. The girl who listened, the one who smiled and made him believe for one night that what he had inside might actually matter. Could that woman, the tired, elegant woman with the haunted eyes and the music box clutched to her chest, really be her? Rebecca, he whispered. He said the name like a prayer, not expecting an answer. Outside, the mist had thickened into fog, curling around the windows like memory itself. The air was heavy with rain, rust, and the faint perfume of roses long since gone. Noah leaned forward and closed the music box gently, as though afraid it might vanish if he looked away too long. Something was happening. Something old was stirring, and, for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel alone in the world. The next day arrived with golden light slicing through the mist like an old friend. Rebecca stood on the cottage porch, a cup of tea warming her hands, watching as morning slowly woke the hills. Birds flitted across the fence line. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor rumbled to life, the kind of sound that belonged to a world slower than hers had ever been. She took a sip and let the warmth settle in her chest. It had been a long time since anything felt this quiet, and it had been even longer since she allowed herself to be still within it. When the call came from Noah mid-morning, it startled her. Miss Whitmore. "It's ready." His voice, gravelly and unhurried, echoed in her ear like the gentle roll of distant thunder. "I'll be there soon," she said, hanging up before she could second-guess herself. 15 minutes later, she stepped into his garage. It smelled of motor oil and rain-damp wood, but also something softer now, like the faintest trace of music still lingering in the air. Noah was at his bench, wiping the last speck of polish from the music box. He looked up and offered a small nod. "It plays again," he said simply. She approached the bench, her breath catching at the sight of the box, cleaned, restored, gleaming with a kind of quiet dignity. Her fingers trembled as she reached out and ran her hand across the smooth rosewood. "I didn't think it could be fixed," she murmured. Noah shrugged. "Sometimes things just need someone to believe they're worth the trouble." Their eyes met across the workbench. Rebecca swallowed. "It belonged to my son, James. He died 3 years ago. Car accident, rainy road, no one else involved. Just too fast." Noah didn't flinch. He didn't offer the usual "sorry for your loss" or any of the other polite nothings people said when they didn't know what else to say. He just nodded slowly as if he understood, because he did. "My brother," he said after a moment, "had a rare blood disease. He was 17 when he passed. I was 20. Music was how I got through it, or tried to." Rebecca's eyes softened. "I used to hear James hum this tune at night," she said. "He said it helped him fall asleep. I always thought it was from some old music box album, or a lullaby I forgot. But the melody, it's not familiar in that way. It's personal, raw, like someone bled into it." Noah looked down at his hands. "That's probably because someone did." She stared at him. "I wrote that melody," he said, voice quieter now. "Back when I was 17, after I found out my brother's diagnosis. Played it once, at a summer concert in the park. Didn't think anyone would remember it." Rebecca sat down on the stool beside the bench, her face unreadable. "There was a boy," she said slowly. "At that concert, he played something that stayed with me for years. I remember thinking he looked like the loneliest person in the world, but when he played, it felt like the whole world stopped to listen." Noah chuckled softly. "That boy was terrified. He didn't think he belonged up there. But he did," she said. "And he still does." A long pause stretched between them, filled only by the quiet tick of a clock on the far wall. Then, as if moved by something she couldn't explain, Rebecca placed her hand on the lid of the box. "May I?" she asked. Noah nodded. She turned the key gently, a soft clicking sound filling the room. Then the melody began, slow and deliberate, each note like the footfall of an old friend returning home. Rebecca closed her eyes. She didn't cry at first, not the way she had expected to. The tears came later, quietly and without warning, rolling down her cheeks as the final notes faded. Into the stillness. "I thought I'd forgotten his voice," she whispered. "But this brought it back, just for a moment." Noah looked away, giving her space, but inside something shifted. It wasn't just her grief he recognized. It was the shape of it, the texture, the way it curled into your ribs and stayed there. "I haven't played in years," he said. "Not since my brother passed. I gave up music, said it didn't matter, but hearing it again, fixing this, it reminded me there's still something worth saying, even if no one listens." Rebecca wiped her face with the back of her hand and smiled, soft, weary, genuine. "Someone listened, Noah, even if it took 30 years to find each other again." Later, as she prepared to leave, she turned to him at the door. Would you let me hear you play again sometime?" she asked. "Not just the box, a real piano." Noah hesitated. "I haven't touched the keys in decades." "But you remember," he looked at her then, really looked, and something old and unspoken passed between them. A beginning. "I'll think about it," he said, and for the first time in a long while, he meant it. The next morning came with a hush over Willow Creek, the kind of quiet that belonged only to early spring, mist still clinging to the ground, sunlight filtering through like the memory of warmth, not warmth itself. Noah stood in the garage alone. The music box sat open before him on the workbench, its melody still echoing in his mind from the day before. Something about the way Rebecca had looked at it, at him, had unsettled something inside him. Not in a bad way, just unfamiliar, as if a part of him, long buried under years of routine and resignation, was stirring again. He wasn't quite ready to name it hope, but it was close. He reached for the box once more. He wasn't done, not really. Something about the bottom panel felt heavier than it should. Most music boxes of that era had false bottoms, secret compartments for trinkets or letters. A curiosity of design. Carefully, Noah ran his finger along the inside seam. There, a barely perceptible ridge beneath the velvet lining. He retrieved a slender blade from the drawer and slipped it beneath the edge. It gave with a soft click. Noah exhaled slowly and lifted the false panel. Inside, pressed flat and yellowed. With age was a small photograph, creased at the edges but intact. He held it delicately, like a pressed flower that might crumble in his hand. The photo showed a boy, no more than 10, arms wrapped around the waist of a tall, lean young man seated at a piano. The boy's face was bright, full of joy. The man's face was softer, caught mid-laugh, looking down at the keys. The moment was candid, unposed, real. Noah stared at the image, and then something inside him stopped. It was him, his younger self, unmistakable in the jawline. The unruly hair, the awkward posture he never quite outgrew, and the boy. The boy had to be James. The resemblance to Rebecca was striking. The same eyes, same angle of the cheek. There was no mistaking it. Noah's breath caught. He turned the photo over. Written in careful child's handwriting were the words, "Mom, I want to find him this summer and learn to play like he does." Noah sat down slowly, knees suddenly unsure beneath him. James had remembered. All these years. Later, after a single summer performance and a 10-minute conversation, the boy had remembered him. Had cherished that fleeting moment enough to hide this photo, this dream, in the most sacred place he owned, and Rebecca had never known. Noah swallowed hard, a sudden ache rising in his chest. Not grief exactly, but something adjacent to it. Grief for what never happened, for the lessons never given, the melodies never shared, the notes that never found their way from teacher to student. He could imagine it now. James watching from the audience, tugging at his mother's hand afterward, asking if he could say hello. Maybe Rebecca had taken the photo herself, capturing a moment she never realized would carry such weight. He ran, a hand through his hair, heart thudding, not sure what to do with the weight of it all. The line between coincidence and destiny had thinned to a thread. He stood, crossed the room to the upright piano. Its cover was still off from the night before. He sat, opened the lid, and placed the photograph on the music stand. Then, for the second time in decades, he played. This time he didn't hesitate. The notes flowed easily now, like rainwater rushing through a once dry stream bed. The piece was still unfinished, but it didn't feel that way anymore. The photo made it whole. James had carried the missing half. When the last note faded, Noah let his hands fall to his lap. He stared at the photograph, blinking back the moisture. In his eyes, he had to tell her. That afternoon, Rebecca returned, drawn as if by some invisible thread. She stood in the doorway of the garage, her coat draped over one arm, her posture uncertain. "I wasn't sure if I should come back so soon," she said. Noah looked up from the bench, the photo in his hand. "I found something," he said. She approached, curious, until she saw the photograph. Her breath caught, one hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Her knees buckled slightly, and Noah reached out instinctively, steadying her by the elbow. She took the photo from him carefully, fingers trembling. "I took this," she said, voice barely audible. "That summer." He wouldn't stop talking. "About you for weeks, said he wanted to write music, said you made it feel like more than sound, like something alive." She looked up at him, eyes glossy. "I didn't know he'd kept it. I never saw it again after that trip." Noah nodded quietly. "He hid it in the box," he said, "and he remembered after all that time." They stood in silence, side by side, as the late afternoon light poured through the open bay door, painting them in gold. "I always wondered," she said after a while, What if I'd tracked you down? What if I'd encouraged him more? Maybe he would have had more to hold on to, more to dream for. Noah shook his head gently. Rebecca, he did dream. You gave him that. And somehow, he gave it back. She looked at him again, the photo still in her hand, and something shifted between them, like a door had opened just a crack. Not a declaration, not yet, but a beginning of one. The photo stayed between them for a long moment, worn, tender, more powerful than any words either of them could summon. Rebecca sat on the wooden bench just inside the garage, while Noah stood by the workbench, his hands resting quietly on the edge. It was strange, the way memories could unfold, not as full scenes but as sensations. The smell of popcorn drifting through the air, the twinkle of string lights in trees, the feel of damp grass beneath sandals. The summer of 1995 had been all of those things. I remember that night, Rebecca said softly, tracing the photo's edge with her thumb. It was one of the last real summers before life got complicated. I'd just graduated college. I came back here to visit my aunt and help her pack up the old farmhouse. That fair in the park, it was a last-minute thing. I almost didn't go. Noah chuckled quietly. Same. I was supposed to mow lawns that weekend, but someone backed out of the concert, and they asked me to fill in. I didn't even have real sheet music, just scribbled notes I barely understood myself. You looked terrified, she said, smiling at the memory. But when you played, I don't think anyone even breathed. It was so raw, so honest. I remember thinking, this boy's carrying something too big for his shoulders. Noah looked down, nodding. I was. My brother had just been diagnosed. I couldn't talk about it with anyone. Not my parents, not my friends. But the music, it gave me somewhere to put it. Rebecca's eyes softened. I remember you sitting on the edge of the stage afterward, she continued. I came up to you. You looked like you wanted to disappear. You asked me what the piece was called, Noah said, and I told you it didn't have a name. You said it wasn't finished, she whispered, then looked up. And I told you it didn't need to be. Their eyes locked, the words hanging in the space between them, unchanged after 30 years. I never forgot that, he said. You didn't say much, but it was the first time someone saw the music in me, not just the notes, the why behind them. Rebecca smiled, though there was a sadness beneath it. I wish I'd done more. I left the next morning. Life just moved on. My aunt passed a year later. I got a job in New York. Everything became about meetings, results, deadlines, and then James came along, and everything changed again. You were a single mother, he asked gently. She nodded. Not by design, but by choice. His father didn't want the life that came with a child. I gave James everything I could, but there were things I couldn't give him, like time. I thought I was building a future for him, but I think sometimes he just wanted a little more of me. Noah leaned back against the wall, folding his arms. He must have had a big heart, he said. He did, Rebecca replied, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Bigger than mine. He cared about everyone. He used to leave his lunch for the kid at school who didn't have any. He'd sneak out to walk a neighbor's dog when the man got too sick. And he loved music. More than anything. I didn't even know he'd kept this photo. I think, Noah said, he wanted to find his way back to that night, to what he felt there, to what he saw in you, and maybe in me. Rebecca turned the photograph over again, rereading her son's simple message. Mom, I want to find him this summer and learn to play like he does. She pressed it gently to her chest. I didn't realize he'd been carrying that little hope around all those years. It breaks my heart. It shouldn't, Noah said gently. It's not a story of regret. It's a story of wanting, of believing something beautiful was worth finding. That's the legacy he left behind. And now, maybe we're meant to. Carry it forward." The sun had moved higher in the sky now, pouring golden light through the garage door. Dust motes swirled in the beams, floating between them like tiny reminders that even the smallest fragments could catch the light. Rebecca looked around the garage, at the old tools, the broken bicycle stacked in the corner, the piano in the shadows. "You never left this place," she said. "No," he replied, "but it doesn't mean I didn't get lost along the way." She turned toward him, the edges of her voice tender but strong. "Do you think," she began, "that unfinished melodies deserve second chances?" Noah smiled slowly. "I think they're the ones that matter most," he said. "Because they're still waiting to be heard." They stood in silence for a while longer, neither needing to speak. Somewhere outside, a mourning dove cooed low and steady, its voice soft as memory. And beneath that, the faintest echo of the music box's song seemed to hum in the corners of the room, unfinished, yes, but no longer forgotten. Willow Creek wore early spring like an old quilt, patched with green fields, waking from frost, dotted with crocuses pushing through the thawing soil. Life was stirring in soft places, quietly, insistently. So was something else. Rebecca had planned to stay in the cottage for only a week, 2 at most, long enough to fix the box, to say goodbye to what was. But she found herself staying longer. A morning here, an afternoon there. Then a full day, reading under the oak tree behind the garage, and while the hum of tools and the scent of motor oil surrounded her like an old song. She came often, sometimes with no clear reason. She brought lunch or a tin of shortbread cookies from the bakery that still smelled the same as it did 30 years ago. She'd sit in the corner of the garage, legs crossed, sipping coffee from a paper cup and listening to Noah work. There was comfort in the rhythm of his world. Things got taken apart, examined, understood, and then put back together. Slowly. With care. It was more than she could say for her own life. Noah, for his part, didn't ask questions. He didn't press or pry. He just let her be, offering her a folding chair, a smile, and occasionally a story about some machine that had once been declared hopeless but turned out to be fixable after all. She liked that about him. His silence wasn't empty. It was respectful. Like he knew what it meant to carry weight that words couldn't hold. One afternoon, Rebecca showed up with a long, narrow package wrapped in brown paper. She didn't say what it was, just left it beside the garage door, tucked under the overhang. Noah found it that evening. He unwrapped it slowly, puzzled at first by the shape. Then his hands stilled. A music stand, sturdy, beautiful. Black iron, with copper accents. Not a store-bought one either. This had been handmade, welded with care. He ran his fingers over the curve of the base, his heart quiet and loud at once. The next morning, another surprise came. This time in the form of a moving truck that rattled down the gravel road, stirring up a storm of dust. The driver hopped out with a clipboard and a wide grin. "Delivery for a Mr. Noah Carter," he said, gesturing to the back. "1 upright piano, oak finish, paid in full." Noah blinked, stunned. It wasn't brand new, but it was beautiful. The kind of instrument someone would rescue from a closed-down church or a family estate. When he opened the lid, the keys were clean, the ivory worn just enough to feel like a story beneath his fingers. He knew, of course, who had sent it. He didn't call her that day. Didn't say thank you. Instead, he lifted the lid, adjusted the bench, and sat down. He played. Just a few bars. His hands were rusty, and the pedal needed oil, but the notes were there. And more than that, he was there. By the end of the week, the piano was settled in the far corner of the garage, beside the old window that caught the afternoon light just right. The music stand stood beside it like an invitation. When Rebecca came by the next time, she said nothing, just looked at it and smiled. Noah met her gaze, lips twitching. That wasn't subtle. I wasn't aiming for subtle, she replied. I was aiming for possible. They sat outside that day, under the eaves, sipping coffee and watching as a pair of robins built a nest in the gutter. I used to think healing was a finish line, Rebecca said. Something you cross when you're over it, but I don't think that's true anymore. Noah nodded. Maybe it's more like a garden. Some seasons are bare, others bloom. You just keep showing up, watering what you can. She glanced at him, her eyes warm. What are you planting, Noah? He thought for a long time before answering. Hope, he said finally, or maybe the courage to hope again. Rebecca looked away, blinking against a sudden well of emotion. She hadn't expected him to say that, hadn't expected herself to need it so badly. In the evenings when the sun melted over the fields and painted the world in gold and amber, Noah played. Sometimes he kept the garage door cracked open, letting the music spill out into the fading light. Rebecca listened from the porch of her cottage, cup of tea in hand, heart slowly uncoiling. The melody he played changed each night. Sometimes it was simple, only a few chords, a soft refrain. Other times it reached deeper, searching for something he couldn't yet name. But it was always honest, always his. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew. This was the beginning of something, not grand, not sudden, just real. The light in Willow Creek took on a softer hue as April ripened. Mornings came earlier now, and the evenings lingered, sky stretched in long bands of lavender and rose, like a song easing into its final verse. In the garage, the piano had become more than a fixture. It had become a presence. Noah played in the quiet hours, never with an audience, except for Rebecca, who never clapped, never commented, only listened. She came again that Thursday afternoon, bearing no cookies, no flowers, just a folded envelope. In her hand, and a look in her eyes Noah hadn't seen before. Not sadness, not even weariness, honesty. Laid bare. He was under the hood of a Chevy when she arrived. He wiped his hands on a rag and met her near the bench by the garage window, the one that caught the late sun just so. "I brought something," she said, voice steady but soft. "I wasn't sure I'd ever share it." Noah watched her for a beat, then nodded. "All right." Rebecca sat, unfolded the envelope carefully. Inside was a letter, handwritten, ink faded slightly from age. "I wrote this after that night in the park," she said. "The concert." Noah sat beside her, silence drawing closer. "I didn't know your name," she continued. "Didn't know how to find you, but I wrote it anyway, maybe just to preserve the feeling, maybe to hold on to something I wasn't ready to let go of." She handed it to him, her fingers brushing his. Noah unfolded the paper. Her handwriting was elegant, deliberate. The letter read, "To the boy who played like his heart was too full, I don't know your name. I only know your music. And that's enough for tonight. You reminded me what it feels like to be still in the middle of chaos, to breathe differently. You reminded me that something quiet can still echo. Wherever you go from here, I hope you carry that with you. And if the music ever stops, please know someone heard it and remembers." Noah's hands trembled slightly as he folded the letter back. "You kept this," he said quietly. "For years," she replied. "Moved it from drawer to drawer, city to city. I couldn't explain why. It just never felt right to throw it away." He let out a long breath, pressing the letter gently to his knee. "I have something too." She looked at him. Noah stood, walked to his tool cabinet, and pulled out a battered metal tin. Inside, wrapped in a cloth, was a smaller envelope, creased, water-stained, but intact. He handed it to her. "I wrote this 2 days after that concert," he said. "I didn't even know your name. Just remembered the way you stood at the edge of the stage, the way you said, 'It doesn't need to be finished.' That line stuck with me." Rebecca opened the envelope, her lips tightening as she read. 2. The woman who listened. You said something that night that I can't stop thinking about. You looked at me like the song was whole, even if I wasn't. That might be the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. I don't know if we'll ever meet again, but if we do, I hope I'll have something more to offer. Maybe even the rest of the melody. And Rebecca folded the letter with care, her breath catching in her throat. So we both wrote, she whispered, but neither sent. Timing, she said, or fear. Maybe both. They sat in stillness, surrounded by tools, wood shavings, the faint tick of the wall clock. Outside, birds chattered from the rooftop like children who didn't yet know sorrow. I've been thinking, Noah said after a while, about how long I let everything stay quiet. After my brother died, I closed the piano and told myself, and that was that. But now I wonder, maybe the music didn't leave. Maybe I just stopped letting it in. Rebecca looked at him, her eyes gentler than he'd ever seen. I think, she said, we all have rooms we lock from the inside. Because we're afraid of what might still live in them. Noah nodded. Maybe we're not supposed to open them alone. She smiled. Not wide, not bright, just real. I'm glad you're playing again, she said. I'm glad you came back, he replied. A breeze moved through the garage, lifting a corner of the old service manual on the bench. The air smelled of lilac and diesel, a strange, comforting blend of old pain and something quietly blooming. Rebecca stood slowly, folding both letters, placing them back into their envelopes. Would you mind, she asked, if I came tomorrow evening? I'd like to hear you play, properly, not just through an open window. Noah met her gaze. I'd like that, he said. As she walked toward the door, she paused, looked back. I wonder, she said, if James knew something we didn't. If he left that box not just to remember, but to remind. Remind us of what? Noah asked. She smiled, that some songs take longer to find their way home. And with that, she was gone. The Willow Creek Community Hall had been swept, polished, and dressed in soft lamplight for the spring benefit concert. Bunting hung from the ceiling in faded blues and creams. Folding chairs lined the walls. Fresh-cut tulips adorned the tables. The piano, Noah's piano, stood proudly near the stage, newly tuned and glowing in the golden light. Noah hadn't performed in front of an audience in over 30 years, and yet here he was. He stood backstage, adjusting the collar of his only decent button-up shirt, heart pounding like a second clock inside his chest. Rebecca had asked him a week ago, gently but with resolve. It's a fundraiser for the youth music program, she'd said. A quiet evening, just a few people, no cameras, just hearts open. He'd tried to find a reason to decline, but the truth was, something inside him had already said yes. Tonight wasn't about perfection, it was about presence. From the hallway, he could hear voices, neighbors, former students, old farmers, small-town shopkeepers. Even the mayor had come, his badge of office slightly askew, his voice booming with good-natured welcome. Noah spotted Rebecca across the room, standing near the refreshment table, wearing a soft blue dress that shimmered like dusk. Her silver hair was pinned up. Her smile, gentle, reserved, turned fully toward him when their eyes met. She nodded once. You're ready. When his name was called, the room fell into hush. Noah stepped into the light. He didn't clear his throat or offer a speech. He didn't need to. He walked to the piano, sat on the bench, and unfolded a single sheet of handwritten music. His melody, now complete. No title at the top, just notes. Inked with time and a steadier hand than he once had. He looked up at the crowd for only a second, but in that second, he saw everything. His brother, young, laughing, leaning over the piano bench. James, Rebecca's son, eyes shining with quiet hope. And himself, 17, terrified, playing for a girl who stood beneath the trees and listened like he mattered. He looked at Rebecca. She nodded again. He began to play. The opening notes were low and simple, rising like light touching frost. The room faded away. There was only melody now, melody and memory. He let it unfold as it had always wanted to, gentle, unhurried, but full of ache. Then it began to climb. This was the part that had always scared him, the part he never finished. He had stopped here for 30 years, but not tonight. Tonight, the music rose. It reached toward something bright, not perfect, not polished, but true. Notes fell like rain, danced like morning light across water, wrapped themselves around the quiet hearts in the room. And then, after all these years, it came back down, soft, complete. He played the final phrase slowly, letting it linger in the stillness. Then he lifted his hands from the keys. Silence followed. Not empty, but full. Full of things that could never be said out loud. Then the applause began, not wild, not thunderous, just steady, real. Afterward, people pressed his hands in gratitude. Some shared stories of their own loss, others simply nodded, eyes shining. Rebecca stood quietly near the side of the stage, letting the room come to him first. When he finally reached her, they didn't speak right away. She handed him a folded program. "You forgot to title your piece," she said, smiling. He looked at the cover. In elegant script, someone, Rebecca surely, had written, "Where the light comes back." He swallowed, blinking hard. "It suits," he said softly. They stepped outside together into the cool night. Crickets had begun to sing. The breeze carried the scent of lilacs and something older, like old paper, or the wood of a well-loved piano. Rebecca slipped her arm lightly through his. "I was afraid," she said, "that coming back here would only bring pain." Noah looked at her. "And now," she smiled, "now I think it brought me you." He let that sink in, gently, like the notes of a song that didn't rush to its final chord. They walked in silence for a while, the gravel crunching. Beneath their feet, the stars blinking awake above them. "I used to think unfinished songs were failures," he said. "Now I wonder if they were just waiting for the right hands, for the right heart." Rebecca stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Then let's not waste this one," she said. There was no kiss, not yet, but there was something even, deeper, two lives, long fractured, now beginning to realign. A love not born from fire, but from faith, in music, in memory, in second chances. And in the quiet of that Missouri night, Noah knew. Some melodies didn't need to be loud. They only needed to be true. Summer settled into Willow Creek with the grace of an old friend, returning after a long absence. The fields turned green and thick with wildflowers. Porch swings creaked in the golden afternoons, and laughter drifted from front yards like music, written on the breeze. On the edge of town, behind a modest white cottage and an old wooden garage, stood a little building that hadn't existed 6 weeks ago. The hand-painted sign above its door read, "The James Carter Music Room, Free Lessons. All ages, all hearts welcome." Inside, the space was humble but bright. 2 donated upright pianos stood against the back wall. A row of second-hand chairs formed a loose semicircle around a scuffed rug. There were shelves of sheet music, a tin of mismatched pencils, and a box of recorders that had seen better days. And love. The room was full of love. That morning, a group of kids from the local elementary school sat cross-legged on the floor, their sneakers tapping in rhythm as Noah played a cheerful folk tune. Rebecca stood in the back, watching quietly as the children laughed and sang off-key, utterly unbothered by whether they got it right. She loved this part. Loved watching Noah come alive, his shoulders unburdened, his smile easier than it had ever been in the weeks after they met. He was still quiet, still careful, but something in him had opened. Not all at once, not dramatically, but Truly, and that, she knew, was what mattered. After the lesson ended and the children trickled out, some waving, others shyly hugging Rebecca around the waist, Noah closed the piano lid and turned to her. "You know," he said, "if someone had told me 6 months ago I'd be teaching music again, you'd have laughed them out of the garage," she finished. "Laughed hard," he admitted. She walked toward him, brushing her hand lightly along the edge of the piano. "But you didn't just come back to music, Noah. You brought it with you. You carried it even when you thought it was gone." He studied her a moment, his smile deepening. "And you brought me the rest of the melody." They stood there for a beat, surrounded by quiet. Then Rebecca reached into her bag and pulled out the music box. "I thought it should live here," she said. Noah looked down at the box, its rosewood surface now smooth and shining. He took it, gently, opened the lid, and let the familiar tunes spill into the room. The children's laughter still echoed faintly down the hall. "I think James would have liked this place," he said. Rebecca nodded. "I think he helped build it." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and lit the fields with honeyed light, Noah and Rebecca sat on the front porch of her cottage. A breeze stirred the wind chimes, sending soft notes dancing through the air. They shared a quiet dinner, grilled corn, fresh tomatoes, 2 glasses of iced tea sweating in the warmth. The sky above them turned pink, then gold, then the softest blue. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her bare feet tucked beneath her. "I didn't know healing could feel like this," she said. "Like what?" "Like a quiet porch. Like music, drifting in from another room. Like a second chance that doesn't ask you to be young again, just present." Noah didn't speak right away. He reached across the space between them and took her hand, his fingers warm and steady. "You know," he said gently, "I never thought I'd get to fall in love again." Rebecca turned to him, surprised. "And not surprised at all. Is that what this is?" she asked. He nodded. "Slow and quiet, but yes." She smiled, leaning her head lightly on his shoulder. "It's perfect," she whispered. Weeks turned to months, and the seasons shifted again. Autumn came with golden leaves and the sound of children learning scales. Winter brought carols played on slightly out-of-tune keys, and mugs of cocoa balanced on the piano's edge. The town of Willow Creek embraced the little music room like it had always been there. And Noah and Rebecca, they didn't rush, they didn't define, they simply were. 2 lives once broken, now gently mended, not to what they had been, but to what they had become. Each night, before closing the music room, Noah would open the box. Just once. Let the music fill the quiet. He never said it aloud, but he believed it brought James home. Believed that somewhere, somehow, the boy who once held on to hope for a summer reunion now sat in the music that echoed from wall to wall. On the first anniversary of the music room's opening, the town held a little gathering. Nothing fancy, just neighbors and friends, former students and new ones, a table of lemon bars, a stack of thank-you notes. And in the final hour, as twilight folded gently over the hills, Noah sat at the piano and played. He didn't need sheet music anymore. His fingers moved with certainty and grace. Every note now etched in muscle memory and something deeper, gratitude. The song, once unfinished, was now complete. And when it ended, when the last note faded into the still evening air, the crowd stood in silence. Not mourning, but full of love, of memory, of music that had waited patiently to come home. And now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know what part of this story touched your heart the most. Your words mean more than you know, and they help this little storytelling corner feel a bit more like home. If this story brought you comfort, warmth, or just a moment of quiet joy, consider subscribing to the channel. There are many more heartfelt stories coming your way, stories about kindness, healing, second chances, and the quiet magic hidden in everyday life. From my heart to yours, thank you for listening. Your time, your presence, and your spirit mean the world. Until next time, take good care of yourself, and remember, sometimes the light always finds a way back.